But welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goddess. I'm so excited to see all you beautiful goddesses here in the Zoom. This is so exciting. One of my favorite topics. Um, as sort of a check-in, I thought it would be fun if y'all wanted to share in the chat where you're joining from, and also if you discovered your primary goddess archetype, just so we can recognize who is with us in the circle. I am joining from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So to acknowledge I'm on Tiwa land. And my primary goddess archetype is Aphrodite. And I also work with a secondary goddess, which is Persephone, um, who I think was my goddess up until very recently. So goddesses can change, and it's okay if you don't know who your primary goddess archetype is yet. Ashley says she also got Aphrodite. I love it. Aphrodite sisters. Diane, Hestia, yes, I love that for you. That so resonates. Beautiful. Who else? Do y'all know who your primary goddess is? I'm gonna share a link in the chat. This is the link to your Unleash Your Inner Goddess workbook, which you got in an email you should have gotten. Don't be intimidated. It's a very large workbook, but it's just me having fun with myself. So use it as ever much as you would like to use it. But the quiz is in the workbook. There's also a link to the online quiz in case you'd rather just take an online quiz. Holly Demeter, yes, yes, Demeter, I love that for you. That's the mother archetype, and you are with child and already have a child, so that really resonates. Samantha hasn't taken it yet, but thinking Artemis, yes, the huntress, I love it. Jessica, hi Jessica, good to see you. Hestia, ooh, interesting, my friend, very interesting. And I'm seeing beautiful Katrin, and I'm wearing your earrings. I just wanted to shout out. Katrin gave me these earrings. They helped me embody my goddess and really set me on the path to being curious about the moon and all of this. So got a shout out to Katrin. All right, beautiful ones. Thank you for sharing your archetypes. This is so exciting. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started here. Maybe more will join. I'll try to let them in as they do. Awesome. Unleash your inner goddess. So I really wanted to share with y'all what has been coming up for me on my own journey, but in the process of putting this into a 1-hour training, I was telling Samantha yesterday, like, this could be like a 4 or 5 hour workshop. So please bear with me because I'm going to try to compact a lot into a short amount of time. And just, I hope that you will use today as a jumping off point for your own practice and your own exploration into your primary archetype, the archetypes that really resonate with you today, and how you want to take it forward into your own work, whether it's shadow work, embodying the goddess for empowerment in specific situations. Maybe you want to get the book, Goddesses in Every Woman by Jean Shinoda Bolen, and read that and talk to me about it. But whatever it is, just use today as a jumping off point and try not to get overwhelmed because I know it's a lot I'm throwing at you. And please type your questions in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat throughout. At the end of the hour, we'll do a Q&A. So hopefully you have time to stick around if you have any questions at the end. Awesome. This is me. Hi. So also I have a new website. So ellengilbert.com now is my home online, which is very exciting. And I have rebranded. So maybe you knew me as a self-care coach, but now I am fully stepping into my truth as a divine feminine guide and coach. And just to take whatever I say today with a grain of salt, I am a white, able bodied, cisgendered woman in a hetero marriage. So I have a lot of privilege that is seen, invisible, and that is informing my perspective. And obviously, we're talking about divine feminine. So I like to think of this energy not even really feminine as the gender, but feminine as the energy. And I understand at the same time that if maybe you're not a hetero woman or a cisgendered woman, that maybe your experience of divine feminine is different. And I think that that's really interesting. And there's room for that nuance here. But just to take it with a grain of salt, this is the privilege that I'm coming in with today. But I would love to hear different perspectives to how you work with goddess. And I think goddess and divine feminine is available to all of us, regardless of our gender identity. Yeah, and as I said, I am on Tiwa land in Albuquerque, New Mexico. All right. So today's flow, this is what we're doing. In case you're wondering, I always like to know what the hell we're going to be doing. So we're going to start with just a very quick overview of goddess archetypes, like why work with them, what's the use, how do they work? And then we're going to jump into the 7 primary Greek goddess archetypes that we're focusing on today. There are goddesses across cultures, across space and time, but we're focusing on the 7 traditional Greek goddesses as laid out in the book, Goddesses in Every Woman. So I'm going to kind of intro those for you and talk about the wheel. And it's really the cycle that we're talking about. And then moving on to the feminine power that each of the 7 goddesses portrays and helps us to unlock, which always is going to double as a threat to the patriarchy. So when I talk about patriarchy, I'm talking about the seen and unseen systems of power and privilege that exist in our culture that really does have a hierarchical model of top-down power over when it comes to dealing with social context, when it comes to dealing with the planet, the earth that we live on. We bring it into the ways that we work, and patriarchy negatively affects all of us. So even men suffer under the patriarchy, right? It's gender norms that are rigid and binary that really create harm in all of us. And I am interested in the ways that we internalize that and bring it inside our own bodies, our auras, and how we need to heal from patriarchy. And goddesses are here to help. So the feminine power doubles as a threat to the patriarchy. So we're all good. But then patriarchy has a particular weapon that it will try to silence or quiet or douse the flames of that feminine fire in some way. And I'm really interested in how that gets employed for the different goddess archetypes. And then we're going to talk about how to channel the goddesses. So the specific ways you can work with each goddess, but also how to just channel goddesses in general and some of my favorite practices. And then I have a special invitation for you, followed by a Q&A if there are any questions at the end. Awesome. I don't see any questions yet. Okay, cool. So Goddess Archetypes 101, what are they? They are cross-cultural symbols, as I said, found across cultures, across time and space and lineage. If you're familiar with the work of Carl Jung, he really spearheaded archetypes in our psyches and how we work with symbols from folklore, myth, story kind of throughout human time. And I work with IFS, which is internal family systems, which is a way of working with your different parts, the different parts of your psyche, the different parts of yourself. You've probably heard of inner child work, working with future self, working with higher self, working with the ego. This is all parts work. And I like to combine archetypal work with parts work because the archetypes are really symbols of a reflection of a part of ourselves. And when we work with them as costumes that we can put on or take off or play with, it really helps um, kind of put our ego in perspective. If everything is playful, if identity is playful, then we can try on the costume of the goddess who we need to embody in a particular moment. Or we can take off the costume of a goddess who maybe we've embodied or identified with in a way that's damaging or toxic. So for everything we do, working with archetypes, working with our different parts of ourselves, it's really important to bring a sense of play, a sense of curiosity, and never taking ourselves seriously. As one of my friends says, it's all drag anyway. So everything is drag, right? Like sometimes I put on lipstick and I'm like super playing in the feminine spaces. But sometimes, maybe I'm going to put on something else, something to embody more of my divine masculine energy or something totally different. But it's all drag, it's all play. The point is to see how we relate to these different identities. And really, we get to take the power back when we say, this is who I'm going to be today, and it's my choice. And probably my favorite part of working with goddesses is that they help reflect our true nature. So it is my operating belief that every one of us is already worthy, sovereign, divine, and whole. Like, period. That's it. That's innate, right? And so working with goddesses who are female gods can really help us see that reflected and to help remind us of our true nature when we work with them in this way. So that's how goddesses can help. So it's this personal piece of stepping into our innate sovereignty and divinity. And also just on a social level, we're calling these qualities that are typically relegated to the feminine and typically devalued in a patriarchal culture. We're calling them not only good, but divine. So we're actually elevating and empowering these pieces of ourselves that have been so devalued and harmed in a patriarchal culture. Values like receptivity, values like being the fierce protector mother, values like being the maiden, the playful, creative one. So all of these values have a place, and not only a place, but they are sovereign and divine when we look at goddesses. Okay, so this is the part I'm most worried about overwhelming people with, because I work with the wheel of the year very naturally, and like it's everyday part of my experience. So I'm gonna try to like intro it, but if it doesn't resonate, just don't even listen to anything I'm about to say, and then we'll come back to goddesses, I promise. But to me, it's really helpful to overlay goddesses and the wheel of the year. I work with the wheel, the cycle, the spiral, whatever you call it, as a divine feminine symbol. And this has been a symbol of the feminine, again, throughout cultures, throughout time. And the idea is that we see reflected in nature, the ebbing and the flowing and the waxing and the waning and the rebirth and the death, right? It's all reflective for us in the 4 seasons, the 4 earth seasons, but also in the moon cycle. It's reflected for us in the menstrual cycle, which corresponds really beautifully with the 4 seasons. So wherever you are with that, I'm going to overlay some goddess wisdom here. So with these 4 typical seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, we have the 4 feminine archetypes. So these archetypes have been around basically since Carl Jung, and wild woman actually got added as the life expectancy for women grew. We needed like another season of our lives. Um, but the idea is that we have the maiden, the mother, the wild woman, and the crone. And these really sum up the journey of our life. So it starts with the maiden, who can represent the inner child, the inner adolescent, moving into the mother, who is a little bit more of that mature feminine. Um, I really think of the mother as the one who is here to mother the world. So whether you have children or not, it's just a sense of being at that peak, like serving energy, that peak, that peak flow with your purpose and whatever you're creating. It doesn't have to be human life, it could be anything. And then we move into Wild Woman, who rules over the autumn. She also rules over the premenstrual phase of the cycle. So I think we all know what that feels like. Um, and I like to really embrace Wild Woman in that time and say, oh, yeah, you have a place. You belong here. I'm going to use your energy, your wild, creative, out of control energy in this season of my life. And so for a lot of women, this could be during menopause, this could be after becoming an empty nester or retiring. There just tends to be a phase of like extreme creativity, social justice alignment, and really just throwing like all of the power at making the mark on the world that they've been waiting to make. And then we move into the crone phase, which is the elder phase of the cycle, which in our culture is very devalued. And it's a huge problem. But the beautiful thing is you can work with all of these archetypes at any time. Like you can work with your inner maiden, you can work with the inner child work at any time, right? Or you can work with your future self, your elder self, the part of you that is very wise and all knowing, and that would be your crone. So we work with these a lot in my programs. And it's become sort of second nature to me to think of like when I'm ovulating, I'm in my mother energy, which is the mature feminine, or when I'm bleeding, I'm in my crone, like very witchy and ritualistic and wise. And so what happened next was really surprising to me. So just stay with me and I'm going to walk you through it. So this is right, the 4 simplistic archetype way of looking at things. But then we have the 8 seasons of my Celtic ancestors. So if you have Celtic ancestry or if you're familiar with the cross quarter days, it adds 4 new seasons to the calendar. So we have Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas, and Samhain, which you probably know as Halloween. These are astrologic cross quarter points between the traditional seasons. And I've been working with these as I work with the Wheel of the Year. And basically, it's just to show you that even within the 4 traditional seasons, there are like portals between them, right? They're sort of the crossover point. And that's where things get interesting. Because in my work with the divine feminine archetypes, what has been revealed to me are these 8 divine feminine archetypes that are really clear in my psyche and in the psyches of the women that I work with. And I find them so interesting and so helpful. And they correspond with the Wheel of the Year so beautifully. They correspond with the menstrual cycle, any cycle of creation and destruction, of death and rebirth. These are the archetypes that I saw coming up again and again. So we have the witch, the maiden, the lover, the mother, the huntress, the queen, the mystic, and the sage. And I introduced them here not to overwhelm, but to say that if talking about the specific goddesses today doesn't resonate, or you're just like, why are we talking about Greek goddesses? Maybe turning to these archetypes will be more helpful. And maybe it's a little bit more memorable to stick in your mind. And I will say you're going to get all the slides for this. So don't even worry about writing it down. It's all going to come together, I promise. Okay, they also relate to the moon phases. And here are our goddesses. So obviously there are 7 goddesses and there are 8 wedges on the wheel, but Persephone is the double-headed goddess. So she takes on the archetype of both the witch and the maiden. She spends half of the year in the underworld as queen of the underworld, and that's really her witch self. And then she is reborn every spring. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the myth of Persephone, but she, like in the northern hemisphere, was just reborn and she came back basically to the earth realm, and she's embodying once more that maiden energy. We also have Aphrodite, Demeter, Artemis, Hera, Hestia, and Athena. And hopefully this will all come into a little bit more focus and integration. But if not, you're getting the slides and you can always just ask me questions. But this is everything so you can see it all overlaid together. And I was really excited when this kind of clicked for me, and I wanted to share it in today's training. And why I love working with divine feminine cycles and divine feminine, like the wheel archetype, is because it really shows us that every part of our experience belongs. Every discomfort, every pain, every experience, it has a home in the cycle. So whatever you're working with, depression, anxiety, like literally anything you can imagine, what I see with my coaching clients time and time again is just knowing that it's not bad or wrong to experience those hard times, and that there's actually a place we can work with them. There's a place in the lunar cycle, there's a place in the menstrual cycle, there's a place in the wheel of the year. And now we also have divine feminine archetypes that we can call on for their wisdom and their unique gifts during these times. And don't take it too seriously. You don't have to literally believe that those goddesses are coming to your aid, but maybe it's helpful to just feel like, okay, this is the Persephone part of me coming forth, or I can see this modeled in a story or a myth. And there's something really comforting about that, and to know that you're not alone. And these are patterns that we see across women's lives. So, okay. In her book, Goddesses in Every Woman, Jean Shinoda Bolen, who is a Jungian analyst, she breaks the goddesses down into 3 main groups. And I just present them here because it makes it a little easier to wrap our heads around, I think. But the 3 types are the virgin goddesses, which it's not virgin as you think it is, the relational goddesses, and the alchemical goddesses. And I'm going to get into those. So we'll start with the virgin goddesses, and I'm going to break them each down and give you a little bit of their myth, just as some background information. But I do encourage you to do your own study, particularly around your primary goddess, like really learn her story. So the virgin goddesses, they're not virgin in that they don't have sex. They're virgin in that they are whole unto themselves. They do not necessarily have relationship with men or with other beings or any sort of children. These goddesses in their Greek myth, they were really independent, self-motivated, driven. They were whole unto themselves. And if they had any sort of room to grow, it might have been that they needed a little bit more vulnerability to really connect with other gods, goddesses, or humans. And so that's something I often challenge my virgin goddess clients to do is like, where do you need to soften? Where do you need to show a little vulnerability, maybe in a relationship? And maybe that's the challenge for them. And so we have 3 of them. So we have Artemis. Artemis in the house. I think Samantha said she resonated with Artemis the most. I love Artemis. So Artemis is the goddess of the hunt. She is the archer. She always has her bow and arrow. She has very perceptive vision. She can see really far distances. And she's just such a badass. Like, she's protecting the wildlife. She protects young girls specifically. And I think of her as like a social justice warrior. She's here to rescue and to save. And yeah, we're going to get into some of the shadows that come with that. But for now, we're just going to say she's a badass. All right. And then we have Athena, our second virgin goddess archetype. She's the goddess of wisdom. So she is Zeus's favorite child. She was welcomed into sort of the male dominated places of like the war room because she was valued for her strategy and her wisdom. And she's probably the one who most kind of polices the patriarchy because she benefits from it. So that's a really interesting shadow to work with when it comes to Athena. And then we have Hestia. So Hestia is goddess of the hearth. She represents like this nurturing warmth. She is the goddess of marriage and of birth. When babies were born back in ancient Greece, they would be paraded around the hearth to really honor and consecrate them for Hestia. And when new couples were married, they would bring a burning log from the home of the wife to the new home, and it was to symbolize bringing Hestia into the home at the start of the marriage for good luck. She actually is the least represented as an actual person in Greek mythology. She was more of an energy. And that's why they say sometimes if you're a Hestia, you might struggle to define yourself and to really like know who you are with those boundaries. And you're so introspective that sometimes it's hard to be assertive as a Hestia. Okay, so moving into relational goddesses. So the relational goddesses are vulnerable. They're able to be vulnerable. They're in relationship with others. And sometimes those relationships get so identified as those roles, especially in a patriarchy, that it can be really hard for them to have a sense of self beyond those roles. But what they do is they really show us how to be vulnerable and in relationship. So starting with Hera, Hera is the goddess of marriage. And she really longs for partnership. She longs for strategic collaborative partnership, particularly with men. But I think that can also translate out, right, to be partnership in general, collaborations in general. She's super loyal, probably the most loyal of all the goddesses. And she's a really interesting one. I struggle to work with her and to relate to her, but I'm starting to come into her more and more. And she's a born leader. She's the queen of Mount Olympus. She's the queen of heaven. So she really represents that queen sovereign energy. And then we have Demeter. So Demeter is the goddess of grain and agriculture, but she's really the mother archetype. This picture is so sad, but I think it really speaks to her energy, and it like actually makes me emotional because Demeter is like a fierce protector. She embodies sacred grief and sacred rage because her daughter Persephone, who was her reason for living, was kidnapped by Hades when she was just a child. And when that happened, Persephone went insane with grief and with rage. And she stopped all the plants from growing, and she was starving the people and the gods so that Zeus would have to intervene and rescue Persephone. So she really embodies that like mama bear instinct that is really sacred and really righteous when it gets activated within us. And I think we've all felt that, like, regardless of if you're a mother or not, it's just sort of that like righteous anger and willingness to do anything to kind of save someone or heal the situation. And yeah, and so I'm going to tell a little bit more of the story of Persephone in just a second, because she is an alchemical goddess. So the alchemical goddesses are the third category, and they're really the best of both worlds. They are whole unto themselves and they're in relationship. Um, Jean Shinoda Bolin only identified one, but I took the liberty of also identifying Persephone as an alchemical goddess, and I'm going to talk more about why. So Aphrodite is the original alchemical goddess. She's the goddess of love, sensuality, sexuality, beauty, pleasure, and joy. And the reason that she's an alchemical goddess is because she was already whole into herself, but she would decide to have relationships and to have union with men based on basically her desire. And that was it. And it was based on like a curiosity and really just fun, but she could fall in love, and she did fall in love. But she was already whole into herself. Yeah, alchemical. Great question. I mean, she also has the power to transform situations. So working with Aphrodite is a real transformational magic. Um, she is very attractive, magnetic. So you can work with her when you're trying to like reel someone in, or I mean, it sounds kind of backhanded, but it's not. Sometimes it's really beautiful to kind of use that magnetism for connection and for creation and for good. And so that's what Aphrodite brings. And then we have Persephone. So I made her an alchemical goddess. She's typically a vulnerable goddess, but to me, that just does not even cover the half of it. So she was that daughter of Demeter, who was kidnapped by Hades when she was out picking flowers. And she was dragged to hell, to the underworld, to be the queen against her will. And she embodies both this like little girl maiden, easily victimized and taken advantage of part of ourselves, and this wounded healer archetype, because as queen of the underworld, she actually changed and rewrote her story. And she decided to help others who died and came to the underworld. She helped them through that journey, and she walked with them. And she said, yeah, I've been there. And she helped them as they transitioned. And so in her myth, the myth of Demeter and Persephone, after she was kidnapped and after Demeter went crazy and made everything stop growing and forced Zeus into helping her rescue Persephone from Hades, Hades actually gave Persephone a pomegranate. So this is her symbol, the pomegranate. And she ate some of the seeds of the pomegranate. And when she was reunited with her mother, Demeter asked her, did you eat anything while you were in the underworld? And Persephone actually lied and said, Hades forced me to eat the pomegranate. But the myth actually shows that she wanted to eat the pomegranate. She desired this knowledge, sort of like the story of Eve, right, in the garden, with the knowledge of good and evil. And because she had partaken of the pomegranate in the underworld, she could only be reunited with her mother half of the year. So that's why she comes back to our realm half a year in spring, and then she returns to the underworld in winter. And I just think it's such an interesting metaphor for someone who's always been put in the good girl box of like good, docile, adaptive, but then who maybe gets a chance to be like, actually, I'm going to be something else. I'm going to be freaking queen of the underworld, be a sovereign wounded healer, and have as much wisdom as I can take. And I get to play both of these roles. And that's why Persephone is just such a badass. All right, moving on. I know I'm going fast. The feminine power and the patriarchal threat that each of the goddesses have. So hopefully now that you have a little bit of their background, this will make some sense. So Persephone, we're just going to start with her and go around the wheel. It's easy to see her feminine power is really this playfulness, right? This curiosity and this innocence. So when we work with our inner child, when we work with the part of ourselves from like adolescence, maybe the part before the male gaze really came into play in our lives, the part before socialization really took over, right? We were free unto ourselves. We were whole as we were. And that is clearly a very big threat to patriarchy because we don't give a fuck about male gaze at that point. And so it's pretty easy to see how these qualities kind of double as a feminine power and a patriarchal threat. Moving on to Aphrodite, the lover archetype. I mean, obviously, it's her pleasure and her wholeness. So if you joined me for January of pleasure and you integrated your daily pleasure practice, that was like major Aphrodite power vibes that we were really tapping into. And clearly, this is a threat to the patriarchy. The patriarchy hates to see a woman in her own power claiming her pleasure for herself, not for the purpose of pleasing others, right? It's really, she knows what she wants and what she desires, and she doesn't have any shame around it. Demeter. So as the mother archetype and what we talked about before, she has this fierce protectiveness. She will go to any lengths. She will make everyone starve until what's right is right. And she has really cast off the male gaze. All that she really needed that male gaze for was to become a mother, which was her purpose and her destiny. And apart from that, she's like, yeah, I don't have time for the male gaze. Like, I'm here to like raise these babies up and just nurture the world. And that's my purpose. So that's really powerful. Artemis, our huntress, oh my God, she got so much power. I was like, where do I start? She upends world order. She is devoted to social justice. Her work ethic, like no one can compete with. She is just so amazing, so strong, and she's literally here to flip the world on its head. So of course, patriarchy is going to be really terrified of that because patriarchy's on top. And then we have Hera, the queen. So her power is really in leadership and in knowing what she loves and or who she loves and what she wants. Again, sort of like Aphrodite, that's a really strong power to be clear about what it is that you want. And then we have Hestia. So her qualities are introspection, spirituality, and intuition. She is so strong in who she is because she spends so much of her time in her subconscious, in her body, in those kind of shadow realms. She's not afraid to go there. She's sort of otherworldly. And because she doesn't, and so therefore she doesn't really have time for the 3D realm, for patriarchy. Like she just doesn't even really acknowledge that it has any power over her because she's so busy like being in her own vibes. And she's hella intuitive. And is there anything more powerful than a woman who has fully embraced her intuition? And then we have Athena, our sage, our wise woman. She is full of wisdom. And the reason that she's a threat to patriarchy is because she's in those male dominated spaces and she could potentially compete with men and outcompete them, right? She could be seen as a threat in that way. And just like Artemis, she could be seen as a potential who would topple the paradigm and actually bring about a new era and a new change. Okay. I'm going so fast. I love reading your comments also. I'm just saving the questions till the end, but this is making me so happy. Let me know in the comments like what's resonating. I think it's really helpful for us all to feel like, okay, I'm being witnessed in this experience that I've had. Maybe there's particular powers that you felt at different times in your life. Maybe there's particular weapons we're about to talk about that you have felt that something or someone or something you've internalized was trying to silence your power in some way. So to the extent that you feel comfortable, you can share some of those reflections in the chat. Okay, but they're really how patriarchy responds to this power in order to silence it. So for Persephone, it's pretty clear what happened to her, right? It's that she was totally victimized and abducted and dominated. And so it can really create this fear in us, like if I'm playful and free, then this is what's going to happen. You know, I'm going to be dominated. I'm going to be abused. And that can really keep us from fully embracing that feminine power. For Aphrodite, it's really patriarchy takes advantage of her pleasure-seeking nature. It has the potential to objectify her, right? Turn her into a sex symbol, a sex object. I heard this great thing that was like, basically women are turned into objects before they even have the chance to be the agents of their own pleasure and their own desire. And what a tragedy that is. So we have to take that back and remember that we have agency, we have autonomy, we have the authority to seek our own pleasure. It doesn't have to be that we are a product for the male gaze or for some other one's pleasure. So anyway, patriarchy also can create some shame around desire. I think we've all felt that, where it's like, my pleasure is bad or wrong. What I want can't be trusted. You know, I am not trustworthy. My desires are not trustworthy. That's all Aphrodite weapons that are used against her and her unique brand of feminine power. Yes, Demeter. So we just have one, but it's loaded, and that is selflessness. So it's the idea that as a woman, our value is in how little we regard ourselves, how little room we take up, how few resources we take up, because that's needed by others, and we're just here to nourish. And it's easy to see that patriarchy would use that against women. That's why like every other Mother's Day card out there is like, thank you for being selfless. And Glennon Doyle talks about this in her book, Untamed, quite a bit, how like, why is it that that's the highest praise we can receive as women, which is to basically become nothing. And so we got to take care of ourselves. All right. And then Artemis. So if she's this like badass warrior woman who is upending, you know, world order, and she's here to protect, especially women and girls, and she's all social justice focused, it's clear to see that she can quite easily burn out. And this was my experience in my past career working in international women's rights specifically, was witnessing the amount of burnout that was happening. And it's why I decided to switch careers and become a coach, because the last thing that our world needs, especially in this moment, is for these like badass women with big hearts who like really are making the difference to burn out. That's like the last thing we need. And it is so clearly a weapon of patriarchy, right? That we've brought inside that says, my worth is only what I can produce. And if I don't have enough work or hours on my time card or whatever, then how will I know that I'm worthy? How will I know that it's ever enough? And this is internalized capitalism, which is under the umbrella of patriarchy. And it is so, so destructive and really tragic because of who it burns out. And we need our Artemises. We need all of them, but we really need our Artemises right now. And then Hera, remember the queen archetype? She can definitely fall victim to competition with other women because remember, her whole thing is partnering with a man strategically. So it's really, she has aligned herself, kind of like Athena, right? She aligns herself with patriarchy in order to be safe, in order to be protected. I also think of her shadow as like heteronormativity. So whether you're in like a hetero relationship or not, it's those gender norms that she really clings to because they've kept her safe. And again, I see this a lot with white women who are so close to the power of, they already have the benefit of being white and the privilege, the racial privilege, and then they like align with their white brothers to really kind of hold on to that power. And they don't care like who they step on or that they're not evolving or like getting with it or who they're not helping. And that's like a huge problem. And I think of that as sort of a Hera shadow, but also an Athena shadow, because they're very closely aligned with men and with patriarchy. And then we have Hestia. So she can definitely be taken advantage of because she is such a natural nurturer. And it's clear to see, like, if she's already this domestic goddess, she can be kind of kept in a box, kept in her place by patriarchy. And then we have Athena. So similar to what I was saying about Demeter, there can be a lot of competition, even to the point of hatred of women. So misogyny that is perpetrated by other women, that can show up as a weapon used against Athena. And she's really cut off sometimes from her own body's wisdom because she's been so praised for her facts and her knowledge and what she's learned that she doesn't tap into the innate wisdom in her body. So it's anytime that we're prioritizing facts and figures and data and like knowledge over our own just inner knowing, our intuition. Okay, and I don't have much time to go through this, but I will just say that I'm sharing the slide deck with you, and I've got tips in here on channeling each of the goddesses, when they're really useful to channel and how to do it. And in your workbook already, you can see that you have the self-love for each goddess and the shadow for each goddess. And that, I think that's a really simple way of just kind of breaking it down. And so that's what I'll kind of focus on here. So again, starting with Persephone, she needs to cherish herself. So if you don't attend my self-love sermons, I just did one on Persephone and cherishing the inner maiden. And I really recommend the replay if it's something you're curious about, because that's what she really needs, is to feel cherished and like it's safe. It's safe to be playful. And like when we do inner child work, they often don't feel like it's safe to play and to kind of step off, the treadmill of patriarchy and capitalism and just go play and be free. So she really needs to cherish herself. And her deepest shadow is anxiety. So it's just that feeling of not being safe. Can really help cherish moments. For Aphrodite, her self-love is she needs to please herself. She needs to please herself. And that doesn't mean that you're always for others or anything like that. We need to kind of remove the moral shame around it and just see that pleasing ourselves can be so beautiful and nourishing and really self-sustaining for the world. And then the shadow she has to deal with is shame. So moving on to Demeter, her self-love that she needs to cultivate is to nurture herself. So she's always nurturing the world and the babies and the ones who need help, but who nurtures her? So really finding those ways of nurturing yourself and tending to yourself like you would want a mother figure to do. Maybe not even the mother figure that you got. How can we bring in some spiritual reparenting and self-mothering? And her shadow is really bitterness, because her identity has been so wrapped up in being a mother that there can be some bitterness and a tendency to live vicariously through the child. And for Artemis, she needs to rescue herself. She really wants to rescue the world and to like do all the things to save everyone else, but she falls victim to internalized capitalism and burns out. So how can she rescue herself? By doing this inner work, by healing the inner capitalism and seeing that her worth is innate and inherent, and it's not based on how much she can produce or do. And for Hera, she needs to empower herself, right? So when we work with Hera with our self-love, how can we really empower ourselves? Hold ourselves up high and put that crown on our head, do some power poses, like whatever makes you feel super sovereign and empowered and queenly. And she needs to really look out for jealousy. That's her shadow. Hestia needs to nourish herself. So again, she's always nourishing others, kind of like Demeter is always nurturing others. But how can Hestia nourish her soul? And we can call on her to really help us with this, whether it's like a day of journaling, meditation. You can just call on Hestia to be really introspective and to help you feed your soul. Her shadow is that lack of definition, and a little bit of a lack of like assertiveness. So the shadow then could be like trying to bring in a little bit more of that energy. Athena needs to understand herself. So we can use her, we can call on her when we're really feeling like we want to better know ourselves and have a full picture of who we are, why we're here, why we're experiencing what we're experiencing, because understanding breeds compassion, and it takes work and it takes time. And her shadow is disembodiment. So really being cut off from the body's wisdom, the body's sensations, the body's healing power, being cut off from your own presence. These are some of my favorite ways to channel goddesses generally. Use this as a jumping off point, explore it for yourself. Doing visualizations with your goddess archetype or with the goddess you're channeling, having a conversation with her intuitively, writing her a letter or writing a letter from her to yourself is really powerful. With my clients, we'll often use different colored pens to represent the different parts or the different goddesses and put them in conversation with each other. So like maybe your inner Persephone and your inner Demeter need to have a little bit of a conversation about setting some boundaries or whatever it is. And it's all very woo-woo, right? Like we do this to look at the parts of ourselves, but we also do it to look at our relationships externally. Like everything is a reflection of the psyche. Everything is a symbol or a metaphor for something that needs integrating within us. So we can also work with sacred objects. I have my rose quartz always here for Aphrodite because she is my primary goddess. So to just acknowledge her, honor her, keep her close. Whatever that looks like for you. Maybe it's like a particular lipstick that you need to wear, or a dress, or anything, or an object for your altar. You can research the different herbs or crystals if that's your jam. It's totally up to you. And it's for you, it's not for anyone else. So yeah, and please do keep in touch. Reach out if you have questions. We're gonna go into a Q&A now, but I'm here. I'm here for the free clarity calls. If you've never worked with me before, we can talk about your goddess archetype. We can do a visualization if that's your jam. Check me out on Instagram, and that's a typo. It should be Ellen S. Gilbert. My bad. That's my Instagram handle. Let me know what you thought of today's training. And now you can catch me at ellengilbert.com because that's my name and that's my website. So that's really all I have for today. So maybe we should get into some questions. If you're still here, give yourself a round of applause.